Next example. Front office and back office adjustments. As you may know, lots of government agencies generate data, the data that all the rest of us use when we do our economic analysis and our economic testing, right? So you might think that that's an area where you can trust the numbers. The economists generating statistics are, generating honest numbers. When I met with a number of them, they told me about front office and back office adjustments. And I said, what's a front office and back office? Okay. A front office adjustment, they said, is when you go and you develop the numbers, let's say for an economic forecast or data, and you send it to your supervisor, and you get it back with a little sticky note on it, and the little sticky note says, this number isn't big enough, or I don't like this number, it's too big, whatever, and then expecting you to go back, change your model, change your parameters, change your data in one way or another so that you can come up with the target that has been given to you after the fact. That's a front office adjustment. Okay, what's a back office adjustment? Back office adjustment is when you're told before you even start the economic analysis, here's the number, go deliver this number. Okay, I said to these economists, what do you do in cases like this? And they laughed and they said, well, we try to distinguish between misdemeanors and felonies. If we're being asked to manipulate data that we really don't care about and isn't that important and the report isn't going to really hurt or help anybody, we go ahead and do it. If, on the other hand, we think that this is really over the line, then we do our best to call in sick, to do whatever, to shift it off to another economist, find a way to avoid it. But every day, essentially, we have to, kind of fight the guerrilla warfare in the trenches to ensure that we're not doing work that is just beyond the pale. Final example. Here's an example, I'm just going to read this to you quickly. Here's an example that combines the two problems I've just described. Time limits, the fact that people are asked to do work that there's with no time, and biased research. As you may know, or some of you who have studied labor studies, if there's a big strike, like the West Coast dock workers go on strike as they recently were, under US law, if the national government, the federal government can prove that that strike is somehow fundamentally undermining the US economy, that it represents a fundamental emergency. If it can be proven that it's a fundamental emergency economically, then the federal government can go to court and get an injunction against the strikers that makes them go back to work. Okay. A new member of the Council of Economic Advisors. Now, these are three of the most important economists in the world because they advise the president directly. A new member of the Council of Economic Advisors said that he was hired, this was in the 1970s, he was hired just as the dock workers had gone on strike. And he was told that the federal government was going to go to court the next day to get an injunction, and that his job was to produce in 6 hours a complete economic analysis of how this strike was going to affect the US economy, and he had to show that it was going to be an emergency situation. And here's what he said, quote, "The legally specified basis for the injunction was demonstration of the existence of a national emergency. But in this case, first, the administration made the decision to claim there was a national emergency in order to obtain the injunction, and then economists were instructed to provide supportive data and analysis, which this economist did, and the government got the injunction, and the workers were forced off their strike and back to work." Now think about this. In this case, and in so many more of the ones I'm talking about, the political decision or the decision by a private actor is taken first, and then fraudulent research has to be undertaken to show that the decision that's going to be taken, or that has already been taken, I should say, is in fact the right decision to make. I've given you examples from the public sector, but I'm just going to mention the private sector quickly because I don't want to leave you with the view that this is a government problem, because lots of these economists work in the private sector, and we hear exactly the same stories, especially among economic consultants. Now, these are people who get hired by, say, a corporate. Let's say a corporation a housing development corporation wants to buy a big tract of land, and they want to put up 40 houses. And they want to go to the city, and they want the city to give them tax breaks and subsidies and tax abatements because they don't want to pay the full cost for their development. So what do they need? They need an economic impact assessment that will show the city that the impact of this project is going to be so great on the city that even if you give us the tax breaks, the city's going to make out great in the long run. This is a perfect example of private sector. What I was told here is that lots of private sectors clients don't want economic expertise. What they want, one guy said this to me, he says, they want us to they want to buy opinions, not expertise. They already know what they want to do. They want economic analysis that will justify the actions that they've already taken. And so we get exactly the same dynamic as we get in the public sector, except here it's a private market transaction where a client goes looking for an economic consultant that will sell them the data that they need to sustain the position that they've already taken. One economist that I interviewed, who had been a member of the Council of Economic Advisors, again, this is among the most important economists in the United States, had been an economic consultant, and he said to me, you can't make a living being an honest economic consultant. By the way, not everyone that I interviewed agreed with that, but that was his cynical take on the consulting sector, that there was so much pressure on economic consultants that if you were going to try to be a really honest consultant, you're going to have a hard time holding on to clients, because what clients want is justification for the decisions they've already made. I was told by some economists, never trust a development economist, or a development industry economist. Others said, never trust a government economist. Others said, never trust an economic consultant. An economic consultant. Another said, never trust a think tank economist. And the person who said that to me was a think tank economist. So you get the point. While many economists are out there fighting the good fight every day, trying to do work with integrity, there is tons of pressure on them to do biased work and make it look like real work. Okay, I think that's a problem. I think that's a problem because, as I said a moment ago, economists are everywhere in the economy, in fact, affecting all kinds of decisions. And what I'm now suggesting to you is that a lot of the research that economists do that lead to these decisions that are going to affect your and my life, a lot of that research is essentially fraudulent. Not because these economists are essentially frauds, but because they're in situations where they find that they have no choice but to comply. So that then raises the question, what has the economics profession done about this problem? Has the economics profession done something to try and fix the problem? And the answer is, the economics profession has given this 5 minutes thought in the last 125 years. No thought whatsoever to this issue. Let me give you a couple of examples of how the American Economic Association, the most important association of economists in the world, how they've responded to this issue. I went through the archives of the AEA going back to the late 19th century to see all the times that people had raised the issue of professional ethics. Here's an example, 1929. There was a businessmen's association in Chicago at the time, and this association was doing research. They wanted to learn about codes of conduct in corporations and businesses and associations around the United States. So they sent out a bunch of letters to lots of associations saying, would you please send us back your code of conduct? And here's the reply that they got from the secretary of the AEA. Dear sirs, you should know that our middle name is ethics, but we have no particular code. Consequently, I cannot comply with your request. Best wishes, end of letter. That's it, okay? Now, I chose this one example because it's so representative of how little thought the profession gave to these issues. Here's a second example, 1994, so this is 65 years later. Amartya Sen, the Nobel Prize winner, who writes a lot about ethics, is chairing the American Economic Association Executive Committee in 1994, and one of the members of the AEA had sent a letter to the AEA saying, hey, where's our code of conduct? Don't we need a code of conduct? There's all kinds of unethical work being done by our members. We need a code. And Amartya Sen brought it to the executive committee, which meets once a year, and he brought it up as the very last item on the long agenda. And he said, look, here's the letter. He read the letter out loud. What should we do? And one of the economists jumped up and said, sure, we'll have a code. Its first rule will be, don't predict the interest rate. Everybody laughed. That passes as humor for economists. Don't predict the interest rate. Everybody laughed, and the meeting, this is, by the way, all this is in the minutes of the meeting, although I also interviewed people in the room. The meeting was adjourned. And that's the end of the discussion in the AEA. The AEA was formed in 1885. So we're talking about a long tenure. That's the end of the discussion about ethics in professional ethics in my profession. I think that's a problem because of the ethical quandaries that members of my profession are facing every day. Now, if I'm going to be arguing for professional ethics, I need to tell you what I mean by professional ethics. I'm going to do this really quickly because I want to move on to the escalating case. I'm not advocating a code of conduct. I'm not advocating legislation or rules that dictate how economists have to behave. Economists really don't want to be constrained in terms of how they behave. What I'm advocating is something much richer and deeper and I hope more productive. I'm advocating a new conversation in economics, a new a new critical attention to the questions, what does it mean to be an ethical economist, and what does it mean for economics to be an ethical profession? So what I'm talking about merely are new textbooks, new journals, new publications and conferences where economists get together and in a much more serious way than we have up until now, asking the question, what does it mean to be an ethical economist? It's not a radical proposal. It's a proposal that says, if you've got influence over the lives of others, you had better attend to the ethical obligations that you face. All right, now let me present, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to move through this fairly quickly. I want to present to you a four-step argument. 4 steps, as each step of which, or each 4 premises about the economics profession. I'm going to argue that each of these premises is completely unobjectionable. At least I think they're unobjectionable. What is perhaps objectionable is my claim that each of these premises dictate the need for professional economic ethics. And if you put them all together, it simply strengthens the case. In that sense, the case escalates. As we move from premise number 1 to premise number 2 and so forth, the case for professional ethics gets stronger. Let me take you through these quickly. First premise is this, and it's implicit in everything I've been talking about up until now. Economists enjoy influence over the lives of other people. And in the first instance, they enjoy this by virtue of the fact that they enjoy an intellectual monopoly over a body of knowledge that is vital to social welfare. Okay? Intellectual monopoly over something that's vital to people's welfare. All right, when I say intellectual monopoly, every profession has expertise. To be a professional is to know things better than other people. Otherwise, you're not a professional. So to say that economists know stuff that other people don't know, doesn't really distinguish economics from other professions. But in economics, the problem is a little bit more acute. The gap between the professional and the layperson is a little bit more acute, in part because of the arcane language that economics has chosen to use in order to think what it thinks and convey what it wants to convey. It has trended over the last 40 or 50 years toward abstract mathematical models, toward axiomatic reasoning that I would suggest to you, even with tremendous respect, is largely not comprehensible to non-PhD'd economists. It has gotten so technical that indeed it's often the case that an article that appears in the American Economics Review can really only be read and understood by perhaps another handful of economists who happen to be experts in exactly the same field as the article that they're reading. This has created enormous barriers when it comes to the public assessing the work that economists do. Now, a monopoly over knowledge doesn't give you power unless it happens to be in an area of life that is important to people. If you control something, if you monopolize something that other people need, then you necessarily exert control over their lives, as economists know better than anyone. All right, if economists have influence over others by virtue of this intellectual monopoly, then I want to suggest to you that already, before I even get to points 2, 3, and 4, we already start to confront really difficult ethical issues. Let me show you just a few. Okay, first, economist has influence over the lives of others, has a lot of authority. What should be the role of the community in designing economic policies if that community really can't understand what it is that economists are doing and what economists are saying? What should be the role of the community that the economist purports to serve in designing the economic interventions that the economist will implement that will then bear on and affect the life of that community? There are there are many ways to think about this issue, but let me give you two possible answers. Possible answer number 1, we should respect the autonomy of the community and do whatever we can to empower the community so that the community itself is in charge of the economic innovations that it accepts. Okay? So this first point respects the autonomy and integrity of the community and says they should be the ones who decide what's in their own best interest, because they're the ones who are going to suffer the consequences or bear the consequences of the action taken.